Please join me in the invocation, please. Lord, we just pray for guidance and wisdom tonight. Pray that we do the best for the citizens of the city of Holly Hill under your strict care. And this thing we pray this in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. Anybody have a chance to look the minutes over?
Oh, yeah, I glanced at it.
I did.
I have a motion to approve.
Approve.
Second.
Motion, have a second?
Second.
No, he
Second.
made the motion, I made the
Oh,
second.
you made the motion?
No,
You made the motion, you made the
Yep, there
second.
we go.
Thank you. All right. Any discussion? No, I didn't have any either.
no.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, reply like sign. Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. All right. Agenda item 1, an amendment request to the waiver granted on June 3rd, 2019 with regard to the type A visual screening requirement. Mr. Walker, would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, sir. This item was before you almost exactly 1 year ago today. Back on June 3rd, 2019, the applicant who owns a building at 1171 South Nova Road requested a waiver to the Type A visual screen requirements. The applicant's in the process now of building a 29,150 square foot building. It does abut residential property on the east. And where you have commercial property and residential property that abut one another, the code requires a visual screen between them because they are considered incompatible uses. The building is a minimum of 35 feet away at this point from its side or its rear property line, which is the east property line. And because of that, a Type A visual screen is required that consists of a brick masonry wall as well as a tree every 25 feet. Now, the applicant came back on June 3rd, 2019 before this board to ask for a waiver to that requirement. And the Board of Planning and Appeals did waive the visual screen requirement. There were some conditions, though. A couple of them was that the existing tree line and vegetation to the east be left undisturbed, and that if gaps or thinning were evident in the existing tree line and vegetation, that they be supplemented with additional canopy and understory trees. Another thing that was stated as a condition of the waiver was that if anything changed, that it would have to come back to this board. Well, some things have changed. Once the construction got underway, the applicant saw that the site would need to be modified. So what has changed? Well, one of the lots on the east side that is actually a residential lot that is in the unincorporated portion of the county, or that's in the county, the applicant had to purchase one of those lots to use it and incorporate it into their drainage system. So now that means that the continuous tree line and vegetation that was expected along the east is now not possible. However, it should be noted that since the lot is now owned by the applicant and is part of their development, a continuous hedge across that particular lot would not be required. Also, once the construction began, it became evident when you look at the grading and topography of the land that it really made little sense to supplement all of the areas where gaps and thinning were present. And that's because there is a big drop in grade between the rear of the building and the residential homes. So when the folks on the east side look out the back of their property, what they see is an 8-foot painted brick wall that is actually part of the building. And the applicant argues that the 8-foot painted wall is better than a 6-foot wall with the tree every 25 feet that the code requires. So you have the 8-foot wall painted, and then you do have, there is a considerable amount of vegetation back there. The applicant has also, and I'll let the applicant describe to you more, one of the agreements that they've reached with one of the homeowners back there. But the gist of it is that the homeowner is fine without there being any supplemental vegetation because of a deal that they've made with the applicant. So basically, in a nutshell, the request is that based on the situation now, the waiver to Section 98-67A of the Land Development Regulations that was approved on June 3rd, 2019, the request is that it be amended and that the 8-foot back wall of the building, along with the existing vegetation, serve entirely as the required visual screen between the commercial property and the residential homes. The staff, in looking at things, I've been out to the site and seen the area. Staff has no objections to the requested amendment. There are some recommendations that staff feels should be made part of the waiver approval if it is approved, and that is that the applicant maintain the existing visual screen, that by replacing vegetation that dies or is destroyed at this point, and that the waiver be valid conditioned upon the site being generally developed as proposed per the approved site plan. If there are significant modifications, however, for example, if the applicant were to say that for some reason they now need to have parking in the rear or doorways in the rear, because now there's absolutely nothing back there. No windows, no doors, no parking, no air conditioning units. There's nothing back there. But if they were to come back and for some reason need to do that, then it could come back to this board again for consideration. And that the applicant, well, again, that the applicant meet the conditions that they have worked out with the neighbor to the north, on the far end, north end. So those would be the recommendations that staff would have if this waiver amendment were approved. And that concludes my presentation.
Does the board have any questions for Brian?
Do you have the picture of the back of the building?
The back of the.
There's a bunch of pictures in the agenda.
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Walker, what's going to be on the rear property line of the new building?
On the rear property line, there is
Near the rear property line.
right now, if you were to go and look at the rear property line, you would see a significant amount of vegetation. There are trees. Ms. Nelson, can you scroll? I'd like to show the commissioner.
Down, or you mean another picture?
Page
Yeah.
Page 17, it looks like, Brian.
Okay, yes, page 17. That's the rear.
17.
Or if you could just keep going up.
That's what I had was.
Yeah, okay, just keep going up. Nope, I'm sorry, down. Okay, so this is kind of what you would see in many areas. And you can continue down. So there's very thick vegetation now. That's not to say that there aren't gaps. Where you have gaps, what folks see is folks kind of see trees, and then they would see, if you go down, if you keep going down, Ms. Nelson, they'd see that, a brick wall. So right now, the code would require a 6-foot masonry wall and a tree every 25 feet. Right now, they have an 8-foot masonry wall considering the building as that wall, instead of building a 6-foot wall on the property line. The building is 35 feet away, and they would see that 8-foot wall and then just building.
My concern is when I listen to your presentation, it sounds like they're talking about different things along different property boundaries.
The
requirement was for a single 8-foot, 6-foot masonry all the way across the back. That was the original requirement. Am I not correct?
Correct, and this board waived that requirement back on June 3rd, 2019. So here's basically how things developed. There was the requirement for a 6-foot masonry wall and a tree every 25 feet. The applicant came a year ago and said, look, there's already a significant amount of vegetation back there. I'm going to have a building that's 35 feet away, and I'd like the building to serve as the wall because there's going to be nothing back there. But I'm going to supplement the thinning vegetation, and so there would be that continuous tree line and vegetation. Once construction got underway, it became evident that they were going to need to buy one of the lots in the back to use for drainage. So right there, that now meant that there was going to be a break in that tree line. They have to come back to you because one of the conditions was that if there were any changes at all, it would come back to this board to look at. So now there is the change in that that lot was purchased and it's going to be used for drainage. Also, there is a big drop between the back of the building, and it's not as noteworthy in this picture, but there's a big drop between the building and the actual homes, so that to put in vegetation and hedges, people wouldn't actually see the hedges. They would be looking several feet over them at that back wall. So the request is that let the building serve as the brick wall and leave the existing vegetation, let that serve as the vegetation, not having to go and try to supplement in areas where there are big grade changes that no one would notice.
Right.
Now, one of the property owners down on the north end, and again, the applicant can explain to you in more detail what their agreement is, they have a written agreement, basically has said, look, I'm fine with you not doing any more vegetation or anything like that, but what I'd like you to do is help me to do, I believe it's a privacy fence and maybe some hedges.
Right, and I saw that with this document.
Right.
And so my concern is whatever's going in there now changes. They grow and they really have to get a bigger facility. They move out, something else moves in there. Now you have residential properties abutting a building that may be used for something completely different. And we're going to have to go and look in the records. Oh, wait, how come these people can see what's going on there, whereas those people can't because they have a privacy fence? My point of view is you put the privacy fence along the whole back of the property, not just on one, so that we don't have to come back 5 or 10 years from now and say, well, what was the original intent? I mean, it's residential properties. Businesses should be screened from those residences so that they don't have to put up with that. It also keeps homeless folks from walking in off of Nova Road and setting up camp in that vegetation behind people's houses. That's some of the concerns I have.
Well, they won't be able to do it along the entire back anymore.
Sure, because
they've purchased that lot.
Right.
And because of the grade change, some of that fence on the south end of the property would be down in a ditch. So those are some of the things that have caused him to come back and say, I'd like the building to serve entirely as the back of the building to serve as entirely as the barrier. Now, this board can absolutely say that if there is a change in ownership, that this waiver is given contingent upon the building being owned by the current owner and used for the purpose that it is now being used for, and that if anything ever changes back there, that it come back.
To me, it's the usage of the building, not the ownership that counts.
Right. Well,
It's a nice big building. You could put a big box store in there, but if you do that and trucks are driving in the back and unloading and all that stuff, that's the concerns I have. I'm
Right.
sure the applicant's going to do everything
Excuse me.
correctly.
The back of that building there that we're looking at,
Right.
is that gonna be paved?
No, that's a retention. That's going to be a retention.
Okay.
You mean,
That's part of the stormwater
What we're
system.
looking at here.
no,
with
not
the
what we're looking
pipes
at on
are-
this picture. That's the backyard of the building.
That's a retention pond. It's going to be a retention pond.
That laps up right against the wall of the building?
No, it's going to be dry retention. Most of their retention is actually going to be in tanks that are underneath the front parking lot.
Interesting.
So this is kind of be overflow, but there's also one of the lots that was actually purchased that's going to be,
Yeah, that's where I assume.
Available for drainage
retention
as
was gonna
well.
go, and then,
yeah. So when you go back there and you look at it, it really is well vegetated, and when you look at the wall, the back wall, the back wall does everything that a 6-foot masonry wall would do. It's 35 feet away. If you were to build a 6-foot masonry wall, people would look at the masonry wall, and then they would see 2 feet of the 8-foot wall and the building.
Scott, what Arthur is concerned about is in the back of this building about the conditions. If we set the conditions today for this owner, this use, and then the changes, do those conditions go with the change, or are they going to do they become null and void?
Oh, no, the conditions stay with the land.
Stay with the land?
Yes.
So then, no matter what.
see, because you missed it, Mr. Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
What my concern about doing this is that there will be no fence or barrier between the residential properties and the business property. And there is vegetation there, but there's nothing to stop people from walking through the woods, so to speak, and,
Weren't they buying the fence?
For the person on the north end,
So this is a different adjoining property?
there's a property on the north end where they're going to be buying a fence for the guy. But the original, a year ago, the board said no fence, no wall, just supplement with vegetation.
Okay.
So now the request is to not supplement with the vegetation because of conditions that have changed out there. But what I had said is that they could, as part of their approval, say that the waiver is granted conditioned upon the building being used for its current purpose, and that if anything changes back there, if they put windows back there, or doors back there, or anything like that, then it would have to come back. Because the waiver is being conditioned upon there being nothing back there.
and my concern, Mr. Simpson, was 5 years from now, if something changes, who's gonna go back and look in the records? And, you'll have one property owner that has a fence, and they'll say, yeah, we have a right to this fence, and the other property owners, if those properties are sold and moved and all of that, they're like, we don't have a fence to protect us from this business, whereas that person does, and it's just, to me, causing problems for the residents in that,
Well,
on those properties.
We're not prohibiting them from putting up a fence, right? I mean, the property owner could always put up a fence.
Yeah,
Right.
And the only difference is that where the property owner is at the other end, they are not, the applicant is not installing a fence, they are buying the fence up to a certain dollar amount, and they're going to install it on the property owner is going to install it on their property. So the only difference between how the property in the back is being treated to the one, I guess, up front, if you will, is the applicant is not buying the fencing material for this other one. But nothing prohibits them from putting up their own fence.
okay.
And in the future, anybody new coming would be coming to the nuisance.
What are the rules,
Go ahead.
Mr. Walker, if the property owners in the future want to have a fence that's even with the other fences? Do they have to follow the ground, or can they adjust the fence so that it is the same height all the way across?
Well, I've never put in a fence, so, but I have seen where there are grade changes
Yeah.
and fences maintained.
Yeah, because I've seen it both ways.
I've seen it
I didn't
both
know if there was
ways.
a city regulation. If we say you can only have a 6-foot fence, but this drops 2 feet and this is 6 feet, are we going to cite them for having a fence that's 8 feet instead of 6 feet? That's my concern.
And that would be something that we'd consider when it comes in for a permit.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is someone here to speak for this?
I have a question.
Wait,
Wait.
excuse me.
Come on up.
Who, you're here to speak for this, or do you represent? Well, come on.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, we'll get to you, ma'am, in a few minutes, okay?
The confusion on why the fence
Name.
over here, oh,
Well,
sorry.
tell us your name and
Oh,
where
my
you're
name's
from.
Matt
Speak
Schwarman.
into the microphone, you're gonna have to.
My name's
turn it
Matt
up.
Schwarman. I'm building the youth center at 1171. So I think the confusion with the fence is the back of the building serves, oh, sorry. All right. So the 8-foot retaining wall serves as a perfect visual barrier all the way along the property up until the one that's here in the letter. The very north property, he doesn't have the back of my building. He doesn't have that 8-foot retaining wall. He has the open space. Lot number one, if you can see. You see lot number one? Do you see how the retaining wall, which is serving as a visual for the rest of the lots, on number one, it doesn't go all the way past to his. So I met with him and I was like, hey, if you don't want to, stare out to Nova Road, I understand that, no problem. And I agreed to pay for his fence to cover that part because the retaining wall serves as the visual screen for the whole rest of the property line. So that's why there's like well, hey, why does number one have a fence? It's not meant as a protection. It's just a visual screen to help him, even though there is vegetation and stuff. And for the record, I have no problem with you attaching a waiver that says this must be used for a youth center, and if you change the uses, you have to come back here. I've got no problem with that. I intend for this thing to stay as a youth center forever. I don't use it as a source of income, so
Sure.
it can stay. Yeah, it's
Best intentions, though, we always have to
yeah.
worry
No,
about
I'd be happy if you'd like to
future.
attach to the waiver that says, hey, you can only do this as long as you're running a youth center. I'm 100% fine with that. And then if for any reason it ever does change, which like I said it won't, but then
Sure.
they'd have to come back here and say, hey, now we want to make it, something else. And then you could be like, well, nope, sorry, got to be a youth center or this. So I'd be fine with that. And yeah, that's why the fence on number one, because it doesn't have the visual screen that all the rest of the properties have.
Sounds good.
So this is going to be a retention area in the back, and I see these stub outs coming up, so there's. gonna
Yeah,
be-
so we paid over $200,000 to have, we've got tanks in the ground to hold all the water because even before we got there, the land drops from, I think it's like 28 feet down to 16. It's a huge drop. So before we got there anything, there was already flooding issues. And we knew, we're like, well, these houses are going to get screwed. They would get flooded. So we've got tanks in the bottom now that hold all the water. That thing in the back is a dry water pond. If there's ever a massive flood or a huge rainstorm or anything like that, it gets wet for a day, dries back out. But those spouts you see, we've all got tanks underground that holds all the water.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we spent a ton of money on it to make it perfect, so that because otherwise those people in the back, without our property, without us being there, could have been flooded. So that was what that's for.
Okay.
Any more questions? Brad?
Fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We'll entertain some speakers from the audience. Please come forward. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Tammy Cleveland, I live right next door to the pond they put in.
Your address, please?
Excuse me?
Your address.
1714 Palm Road, Ormond.
Thank you, Brian.
Sorry. I was just wondering, because the pond does hold water for a day or two, and there's no fencing around it, and there is little children there, and I have pictures from the last few days of the rain of what's he gonna do with the, water and stuff.
How big are your children?
I have a 3-year-old granddaughter that's moving into the home. And I just got notified of this, on the 20th of May, the letter was written. And I had picked it up on the 27th, I believe, of May. And it was over a year ago. He had, I guess had plans for this.
I don't know that.
Well, the pond isn't designed to hold a lot of water, and it will pass quickly. That's the whole idea of it, and there will be extra water. I think, and I don't know that I can give this opinion, but I think that
there's not going to be enough water to drown a 3-year-old in this pond anytime.
It doesn't meet the slope and depth requirements to require a fence.
So it's not gonna, it's not gonna be a deep
No,
slope
no,
pond?
no, not at all.
I have pictures here of it.
So
But it's
there-
not deep,
There's no
deep, but
fencing
It
requirements?
does stay there for a while.
There's no fencing requirements?
It's not even
Not for
12
a
inches.
dry pond, it's a dry pond, it's just the water's to be there for a short while, and then it's to be gone. So, I don't know that I
There's
helped
other
you
kids
here.
across the street from this pond too. And if it's raining, water stands for a day or two. I mean, we do watch our kids and everything, but there is other kids that come around the neighborhood and stuff,
Yeah.
so.
Right.
But I don't know.
I don't know either.
I'm just here wondering why I didn't know about it until,
Are you the property owner?
yes.
Were they required to send out notices, Mr. Walker?
Notices are required to
he
go
went
out
to-
10 days in advance.
He said
and
he
they
went
did.
around to the doors, knocking on the doors, but my tenant said,
I have the
Okay,
proof
all
from the
right.
post
Hold it,
office.
stop.
So,
One person will speak at a time, and Mr. Walker, will you answer this question, please?
Yes, the city has proof that the notifications went out 10 days in advance. We have the receipt from the post office as well as the certified mail return receipt requested green tags from the post office that they were sent out within the legal notification requirement date.
Okay, all right, thank you.
okay.
for us to come here, but I didn't know about any of the pond issue and all that until I was driving to get my, tenant's stuff out of his house because he had passed away. And there's a pond beside the house. And then I get a certified letter, well, I don't know if it was certified, but I had to go sign for to come here today.
Okay, all right, well, we'll take that into consideration. Thank you. Who's next?
May I ask a
Ms.
question of
Heidi?
the applicant?
Pardon me?
I'd like to ask a question of the applicant when we get a chance.
Hi, I'm Heidi Heller of 460 Ridgewood Avenue. I'd like to say thank you very much for sharing some time with me. I'd like to say thank you to the owners for moving the billboard down, even though I'm not a fan of billboards, and thank you for the billboard people for giving a scholarship. However, regarding the fencing and the water runoff, Mr. Walker mentioned that it's thick vegetation. Well, I drove by today. I don't believe it's too thick. If I take my hand, I can't see Mr. Myers. So that's what he did when he seems like he took a picture of bamboo looking at the house. If you're standing at the house on Palm Road and driving down that area, you can see the building and you can see through it. What I would like to see is a fence, as Mr. Burns mentioned, completely end to end. Everything's consistent. There's no debate in the future. It's all taken care of today, and it's just consistent looking. It's not, I don't believe, 12 inches, that retention pond area. If you get the aerial, Miss Liz, you could see Lot 3, they have a deep retention pond. That's actually the whole length, and it looks like it's 3 or 4 feet. So I don't know what the code is for fencing around for the children that are on Palm Avenue. So if it's deep enough for a fence around that retention pond, that entire Lot 3 has been made into, I'd like to see that along with consistent fencing along the entire row. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heidi. Mr. Burns would like to ask you a question. Would you just please
Can I
step
ask you a
back?
question? The purchase of Lot 3 and that was not part of the original plan. That was something you learned that you had to do along the way?
It was part of the approved site plan from the engineer.
Okay.
We did it at the very beginning, and it was approved.
All right, I was just double checking, so,
Yeah.
thank you.
Who else would like to speak? All right, no one. Okay. All right. With no more speakers, I would entertain a motion. I would entertain a motion to approve this recommendation as with the requirements as Mr. Walker has outlined.
I will make a motion with the addition of having it apply to the current property usage. Mr. Simpson, you'll have to help me with that.
Is the goal to say that if there is a change of use, then the waiver becomes a nullity, or is if there is a change in the physical character of that side of the building, that it is a nullity? I mean, say if it goes from it's a gymnastics place, as I understand, what's if it goes to a dance studio?
Or a martial arts center.
Martial arts. Is it,
I'm looking for more, if it becomes a mini Walmart, you know, a large, because that building could easily be used for a small big box store, and the activity around it would increase.
but would it matter then if it, because there is no rear entrances to the back?
Or none, right.
So would it require, do you want it to be a condition only if there's alterations to that side of the building that would allow a pedestrian ingress egress? Because the way it's built, I mean, there's not going to be deliveries over there because they can't get there.
Right.
So,
And even the design of the topography of the area behind the building makes it unusable for bringing vehicles in there.
It's going to be a vegetated pond right there.
And as you said, these requirements run with the land, right? So,
yes.
so the future owners, none of this changes. Can't go back there and wipe out all the vegetation and.
All the requirements that you put on this will be conditions of any future user.
But if they decide to put in a door in the back,
Along that side, then we can say any change to the physical dimensions of, that would be the west side, I assume, the west side, or east side?
East side.
East side of the building
No, that's-
will
yeah,
require a review of
back.
come back for a review of these waiver conditions.
Just like it did now.
Because that would also be, you know, it's a change to the conditions over there.
Of the waiver, right?
Yeah.
If they do that, they change the conditions of the
It would
waiver.
have
If
to-
they've done that,
waiver
they
would have to
nullified
come
the
back,
waiver,
be reapproved.
right?
if we don't come to an agreement tonight, what happens?
Are they recommendation or the final decision? The final decision on this, right? You got to make final decision. You're not an advisory board on this one.
That's right.
So we either approve it or deny it. If we,
Or with conditions. Your last approval, there was no requirement for a fence. Based on the code, it said 6-foot masonry wall and a tree every 25 feet. So that means if there was no vegetation back there at all, they would just have to have a tree every 25 feet. So people looking out of their backyard would just see a tree every 25 feet and then a brick wall, a 6-foot brick masonry wall. So there's considerably more vegetation back there than one tree every 25 feet, and he's got an 8-foot wall and the back of the building. So the bamboo, the picture that you saw with the bamboo is that thick. You can't see through it at all. Later on, as you move down, there are some gaps, but it's still a lot more dense than one tree every 25 feet. So, and putting a fence because of the grade changes and all, in many areas, the people would just, they would look right over it. They wouldn't even see it. Especially on the south end. So I think, Yeah, if the requirement were to be more severe than what you approved the first time, then my recommendation to the applicant, which staff can do, would be to withdraw the request entirely.
Right.
Because right now, he's not really required to do anything but put in some extra vegetation where it's thinning. But he's not required to do a fence, he's not required to do a wall, he's not required to do anything like that. He came back primarily because it said that if there was any change, it would come back, and the biggest change was that he bought a lot to use for stormwater and drainage.
But that's why I asked the applicant, because I don't remember that when we originally approved this.
When you originally approved it, it was not part of the approved site plan. I think you went back, you got more comments from Mead and Hunt, and that's when you, right. So, can the applicant explain it to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Please come up.
Yeah, so we got the comments from Mead Hunt, the stormwater review, so we fixed it, submitted it, and that site plan was approved. And in regards to the thing about in the back, I've got no problem with them attaching a waiver that says if we put a door in or a window or any activity at all, if we modify the back of the building in any way, shape, or form, that it's void, because we're never gonna touch the back of that building. I mean, that wall serves as a much better visual screen than anything I could possibly build anyway. So I'm never gonna touch it. So I'd be happy to, if you'd like to add the rider like you did the first time, that basically says applicant agrees to never add a back door, back window, anything like that. I'd be perfectly fine with that. And that would protect against any activity ever happening back there.
Okay, my part of my concern now, and the reason I asked Mr. Walker, is had I known about the drainage, the retention pond in the back, I might have asked for a fence around that to protect it from the neighborhood children. And I guess we're not in that phase.
Well, the fence to protect for the children, for the retention pond, is a separate issue than the waiver. One is a site plan requirement based on the engineered drawings from the engineer. And so requiring a fence because of retention issues is going into a different realm. That's a site plan issue. This is just a visual screening issue.
Right.
So,
Okay, Mr. Simpson, so help me with the motion again. I can't do
think
anything
the
about
one
the fence on
condition I
the
would say
retention pond.
we've talked about is that in the event there is any alteration to the exterior of the east side of the building, that this waiver shall be deemed a nullity and have to be reapproved by the city.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Can I ask Mr. Simpson a question before I second?
You can second the motion, then we can talk about it. The motion doesn't have to pass. Just because you seconded it doesn't mean you have to vote yes for it. If you
Go
don't
ahead, Mike.
second it, I'm gonna remove myself from the seat, and I'm going to second the motion.
Go ahead.
Okay? I'm removing myself from the chair. I second the motion. Now I'm reoccupying my seat.
Well, you got to remove yourself for the whole duration.
For the whole situation?
So who's
I'll second the motion.
All
Let me know
now
when I
ask your question.
Let me know when I
Ask
can
your
ask
question.
Mr. Simpson a question.
Okay.
Mr. Simpson, I'm not a lawyer. Don't know much about law. But if a child was to get injured in that retention pond that we're talking about, that I've not seen a picture of, who'd be liable for that?
If there was any liability, that's still private property. That's the applicant's property. So that's their retention pond.
Where are these retention ponds at? Back behind the bamboo?
You're looking at it. In that picture,
that-
you
that's
see
the
that
thing
little
that was-
trench?
Little
Driving
trim right there where the
That little
pipes are?
trench is
Okay,
the
so he'd be
retention pond.
liable. Okay, thank you.
That's not the
That's not a
But that's
retention
not the one
pond
we're
that
talking
lady's
about.
got right there.
Retention, but not the retention pond.
Is that the picture of the backside of that building?
Okay, Liz, can you scroll back up to the lots? I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to.
If you do it again, I'll kill you.
Thank you. I deserve it. So where that red thing is in the middle,
Right there where the
where her
pointer
mouse
is?
is, yeah, that's where the
Right
new-
there, that's the
the
retention
new
pond?
retention pond.
New retention pond.
That's the one that wasn't in front of us last,
And the applicant owns that piece of property.
yes.
You answered my question.
All right, so I have a motion and a second. Is there more discussion?
Well,
Continue.
but Mr. Walker says that we can't address that property because that is a staff issue.
That's what?
That's a staff issue, an engineering issue.
Site plan issue.
Site plan
right.
staff-
We're
site
talking
plan
about
issue.
is a visual screen
We're here
issue.
for the line across the back, not that property.
Right.
That's what I was trying to figure out or get clarified, because, like I said, if I was looking at this property today, I would have asked for a chain link fence at least around that retention area, but I can't do that.
Can't do that now.
All right. That's not what's before us.
Correct.
All right. Any more discussion?
Not for me.
Call the question, please.
Arthur Burns,
Yes.
Tony Casada,
Yes.
Michael Meyer.
Yes, motion carries.
May I ask Mr. Walker a question?
About this or something else?
A procedural question.
You may ask him a procedural question.
If someone disagrees with the site plan decisions, such as someone who wanted a fence on a similar property like this, what would their appeal process be? What could they do?
They can come to this board and appeal it. So if,
Site plan, we didn't approve.
because, well, right, the applicant, what happens is if staff makes a decision and says, for example, that based on code requirements, a site plan has to have such and such, or they have to do a certain thing on the site, and they say that it's because of what's in the code, and the applicant disagrees with staff's interpretation of the code, then the applicant can request to come before this board and have the particular item in question reviewed by this board, and this board can make an interpretation.
But there's no public input if they believe that staff has made a mistake in approving something like this.
Looking at the definite, what it says for appeals, it says the board shall hear and decide any appeal except as to variances.
Please say that a little slower,
Yeah,
Scott. Speak
and into the microphone.
The board shall hear and decide any appeals except as variances and special exceptions, and as otherwise provided, where it is alleged that there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by the Development Code Administrator. Just looking at it, it doesn't say limit who can file the appeal. I would certainly think that an applicant could, because that decision's being made to them. Because
Correct.
on their project. I would have to look a little further to see if anybody in the public could file an appeal on an approved site plan application. But for sure, the applicant could. And if and obviously the public would have the ability to take any type of legal recourse for the city's failure to follow its codes and challenge it in a court of law.
You have a card with you, Mr. Walker?
Not on me. I can get one for you right after the meeting.
All right. If you can just hand it to that young lady.
Sure.
All right.
Thank
Can we
you.
move on from this and move on to the next issue, please?
The next issue is to consider a major amendment for the Marina Grand MPUD, and it would be to reapprove and extend the display time for temporary signage that was approved back on March 28, 2017. Back on November 23, 2004, the City Commission approved ordinance number 2714, And that is the ordinance that approved the mixed-use plan unit development, which has become known as Marina Grand. And in the original agreement, it did provide for signage. However, the agreement did not address real estate signage that would be used for the sale and rental of the residential homes and commercial units. So back in 2016, the applicant submitted a request to the city to amend the MPUD with regard to signage. And the applicant proposed a signage plan that included the elements that are in Exhibit A, and that is shown in your staff report. Now, that didn't come out very clearly, unfortunately, in your packet, but one of the main things, and really the only thing before you this evening, is the banner sign that's located on the south tower. That's approximately 100 feet long. That was part of the request back in 2016. So on May 28th, 2017, the City Commission approved the applicant's plan for real estate signage because it approved the Sixth Amendment of the Marina Grand MPUD. But the approval came with a time limitation. It was limited to a 3-year term. So in other words, the sign plan, the temporary sign package that included the banner was approved by the commission, but there was a time limit. That time limit expired on March 27th, 2020. So,
Excuse me. I will have order in this room. Please continue, Mr. Walker.
yes, sir. On May 6th of 2020, the applicant submitted an application to amend the MPUD by requesting that the City Commission reapprove and extend the display time for the banner. And the applicant requests that the plan be reapproved for an additional 3 years from the date of the approval of this requested Seventh Amendment, or until such time that the owners no longer own or control greater than 3% of the total residential units, whichever occurs sooner. And the applicant has provided a detailed explanation for their request, and that's attached as Exhibit B as to why they're asking and their justification for requesting this extension. When it comes to considering whether or not to approve the applicant's request, the Commission has to consider whether or not the request is considered consistent with the policies of the city's comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan's future land use element includes one policy which addresses signage. And that says, such regulation shall ensure that new and replacement signs shall adhere to the community standard for aesthetics and minimize confusion that results from visual disarray, while allowing reasonable identification and promotion of businesses. So the Board of Planning and Appeals and the City Commission is really left to its judgment as to whether or not the proposed signage program is consistent with the policy stated in the comprehensive plan. So that concludes my presentation. If the Commission finds that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, they can approve it, but that is left up to the judgment of this board and the commission.
Is it the board's decision tonight? No,
Your
it goes to the
Advisory on
commission.
this one.
We're recommendation. All right, so my first question is, has the comp plan changed significantly since this was approved the first time?
It hasn't changed at all.
Hasn't changed at all? Correct. Well, Mr. Burns, you were there, and it was pretty aired out. So
It was,
tell me about it.
I didn't know. Since I had special knowledge that the rest of the board had, because I was on the commission when this was approved, do I have any, I don't have any entanglements or anything. I'm just looking.
You can y'all should all disclose if you have any ex parte communications that were discussed outside this meeting.
Yep,
So
I've had no ex
contact you,
parte
but
communications.
Your prior knowledge of dealing with the whole application, the First Amendment, is not ex parte communication.
Okay, because when the commission approved this, when was the original, was it in,
The original.
no, this
or the
one,
original
this,
PUD,
this signage allowance, it was in 20,
sign allowance?
The
17?
actual sign, temporary sign plan was approved on March 28th, 2017.
Yeah.
That's the Sixth Amendment.
And when the commission approved that, we had specific thoughts that we wanted to know if the signs made a difference. According to the letter that's in the packet, it says that when they had to take the sign down in April of 2019, their traffic decreased by 43%, which drove their sales down. And so, I mean, the evidence shows that the sign is helping them sell units, at least according to this letter. And that was the whole, that was most of what the commission's basis were on, because we argued over that for a while.
By the trail of notes, that's true. I read them all. I read the minutes of the meeting.
Yeah.
Entire-
Oh, that's good. So you probably know more about it than I remember.
Oh, no. I just kept seeing Arthur Burns said, Arthur Burns said.
Yeah, because, you know, I hate to see, you know, this is the wisdom of Solomon that's going to take to get this done.
All right. Are you done now?
I'm done, thank you.
Would you like to speak to us? Thank you. Please tell us who you are and where you're
Yeah,
from.
I'm Rob Merrill with Cobb Coal, 149 South Ridgewood. And Arthur and I lived through that evening, as well as the long evening 15 or so years ago when this room was packed out into the lobby about whether or not this project should even happen. So it has, and I think it's been a success. Unfortunately, only half of the project's built, but we're hopeful that, you know, the other two buildings could be built. I'm here actually representing, when I was here 3 years ago, I was here with Brett Dill, who of course, anybody who's involved in this project would remember, to talk about the signage. And we basically had some permanent signage we were taking down and some new signage we were putting up, and then we had some temporary signage. The temporary signage, as Brian mentioned, was mostly to try to sell the units. At that time, I think there were maybe a couple of hundred units they were still trying to sell. My client, Daytona Grand LLC, who's the applicant here, purchased 150 of those units, and they're down to 95 units now, still trying to sell them. So without question, you know, Arthur, you're right. The letter is factual from when it was taken down, and I've got Brian Bergen with me here from RE/MAX, who can also talk about a little more of the detail of his day in and day out interaction with customers as it relates to the signage. But I think we all, at that time and now, would like to see the units sold, you know, have permanent residents in those units, and it's good for the city of Holly Hill without question. And I don't think there's any question factually from 15 years ago to now whether this is good or bad for the city of Holly Hill. It was fantastic, and it will continue to be. We also have, I want to pass up for you, this is, I guess I'll pass them out. I guess the federal government says acres, not pages.
Thank you.
And the,
You haven't been sick?
I sent, no, and I sent the pictures of the existing signs to you electronically. And I'm hoping that, since we couldn't get them up there, I'm hoping that the printout was
They
good enough
have,
for you to see.
they have.
Yeah, so you see a picture of the actual sign. Before I get to that, this is a resolution of the condominium board approving unanimously the continuation of the temporary signage. And I tell you, there was a whole lot of conversation at that long meeting that we had 3 years ago about whether the sign was going to create problems, noise, or otherwise create any sort of hazard for people. And there was a true-up provision if it really happened, how would we deal with it with code enforcement, and you know who talks to whom about taking it down if it's going to hurt somebody and stuff like that. And you know, 3 years later, I don't think we've had any incidents where anybody's been injured or harmed by the sign. So again, you know, we're here to continue it because we still have units to sell. things have happened in the world that have changed the way those units have been sold. It was a miracle that this project, made it through the recession, but now we've got other things happening. And so this is really a request to stimulate additional commerce in Holly Hill, keep selling these units, and bring in new people to the area living in Holly Hill. So that's pretty much it. I can answer any questions that you have. You can look at the picture, and when you're talking about signage regulations, anybody who's been dealing with signs in this place that you guys sit right now realizes that the comp plan policies that Brian was talking about are essentially come down to, does the sign look good? Is it distracting to anybody? Is it tasteful? Is it causing problems? And does it, in fact, promote commerce the way that it should, in such a way that it's not harming anybody and it doesn't look bad? That's what it comes down to. And that's basically the simple version of how all signage regulations in all cities works. And in this case, when you look at that picture, the banner on the side of the building to scale is really no way you can get up on the screen, unfortunately. But if you guys are looking at the paper that Brian gave you, to scale, it's not a very big sign. And in fact, if you drive over the bridge and you look over there, you say, it doesn't really bother me too much. And I'm glad to know that this is a project that's still for sale. So that's the reasoning.
There you go, Rob.
Oh, great. Wow.
Yeah, it's a different one. But
So that's the old one. There actually was some debate on the floor 3 years ago. And I've forgotten, I can't remember exactly who it was, but somebody wanted blue and white instead of gold and white. But it ultimately turned out to be what you see there, which I think is even less bold than the one that's shown. But that's showing the actual size of it. But if you look at your picture that's in your packet, I think it's a much more subdued sign. But it says the message: we're selling. So somebody coming across that bridge knows, hey, I could still buy a unit there. That's the message. So with that, without making this a long evening necessarily, at least from my end, I'll answer any questions. And then if we have people who are going to speak on it, I'd like to have the opportunity to provide a reply.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Before he sits down. When I look at the minutes, I just glanced at it, but I didn't see any public participation. I don't know if anybody spoke at this meeting against this passing.
That was a condo board meeting, so I don't think that there was anybody there. I think there were people in attendance, but I don't think anybody spoke.
Because I'm
No,
trying to.
I wasn't there.
It looks like they were.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to get a feel for whether the people that voted to approve it are mostly people that live there or people that just own units trying to sell them.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know who the members of the board are in terms
Okay.
of what they own or don't own.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to get. If there were a lot of people that stood up and spoke against it, then I would have a better
So
idea.
I don't know from a standpoint of
Or
how
for
people
it.
would have known about this. It's not like a public hearing like this where you
Right.
send out notices and stuff. So I wanted this to be a message from the condo board taking an official action, which I thought was significant. And so
Right.
from
And
there.
if they represent a majority of the people that live there,
They
that
do.
means a lot. If
That's
they
the
only
idea.
represent people trying to sell, it doesn't mean as much to me personally. Thank
Kind
you.
of like the city commission making a statement about something. It comes from
Yeah.
their constituents, the way the
Yep,
democracy is supposed to work.
that's it.
Rob, you said how many units are left?
You said there
90?
were 60.
So there's 95
Yeah.
left to sell.
But they
They
do
had
20 of the
150, and they're down to 95. And I guess Walter could speak to the sort of the sales aspect of this.
Well, I was looking, like, this board meeting was a year ago almost.
Yeah, so I would
They
just,
had 137 units at that time, and now
Yeah.
you have 95.
95 now. I mean, he's got the monthly, or the weekly count, even if you want to talk about the real world day-to-day stuff. Walter's here to answer.
So to get down to 3%, it'd be 3% of the 95, which would take you down to, once you got to 2,
Yeah.
more or less.
It's just getting you almost to the finish line. That's for you guys to use your discretion on where you want the threshold to be. I mean, I started by saying sold. That's what you guys ultimately want, is the place to be sold out, and frankly, for the market to come back well enough so that the other two buildings can get built. And
Do they provide any owner financing in any way? Would they ever take back a unit that they sold?
here's the pro.
Okay.
Please tell us your name, where you're from.
All right, thank you for having me here tonight. My name's Walter Borgen. I'm the broker for Remax Signature, and we handle the on-site sales. I believe your question was, do they currently offer any owner financing? And the answer to that would be no, and I don't see that as an option in the foreseeable future because of the rules that changed with private lending in the residential sector during the crisis. Yeah, absolutely, and thank you again for the opportunity to be up here, and thanks for putting everything together. You know, building signage, whether it's a community, whether it's single-family homes or condos or whatever it is, they're going to bring the most qualified leads in, because the first thing people look at when they purchase the house is it in the location I want? Is it you know, aesthetically pleasing? Does it look like a place I want to live? So the people that come in off of those signs are people that love the location, they love the area, they love the way the building looks, and they're some of our most qualified leads. And about 30% of our overall traffic that we track that comes in says that they came in from building signage. And that doesn't even count the people that saw the building signage and then thought, hey, let me look this up online, and then contacted us through the website or contacted us through the phone number or through the phone. So I believe it's way more than 30%. You know, I think it's a huge percentage, but what we have tracked from our daily traffic that comes in is about 30% of our overall traffic. And during that time that those signs were taken down, it dropped dramatically. You know, during that time, the whole time period it was down, we only had 2 closings. And to give you an idea, the following, from July to December, we had 27 closings, you know. And to add to that, not only does it help us sell units, but it's going to help the other residents of Holly Hill sell their own units. And I guess I'd say the last positive here is that the current owner does own some as rentals, and we're taking them, because we're now selling them at the right pace and things are going along well, we're now pulling them out of rentals to be able to sell. So their rental inventory is going down by us being able to keep up the sale, you know, the flow of sales.
Is there any other, because I think Robbie said they bought a certain number that were available. Is there any other bulk other that is selling units there, or your client the only bulk owner?
It's the only bulk owner that's selling anything. I don't think there's any other substantial owner, but there's no one selling them as a bulk owner. They bought the rest of the existing inventory from Swerdlow Group or HHA.
Okay, when they,
yeah.
Right, that's what I thought. Okay. But I think you said a number. They bought so many units from them. And so the 150 were those retained by Swerdlow. The balance were already sold off, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So somebody could have bought 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, but not.
Right. But Swerdlow doesn't have any.
No.
Okay.
No, there's a total of 486 units, and you know there's 95 left that we have for sale. Of those, there's about 40 that are in rentals that we are now pulling out regularly as those leases expire, so that we can sell those to have the inventory that we need.
And the 3% is 3% of what number?
I would assume it's 3% of what they have now, but that's a topic of discussion. That's why I did 3% of 95 comes down to 2.85. So it's basically once they have 2 left, then that would come down.
But wasn't the 3% in the original agreement?
I don't think so.
That's new to this agreement. I missed that.
Yeah.
Rob, you're going to have to step up there and speak into the microphone, or you're not talking to me.
A couple things. One, I meant to mention something earlier, but the 3% is a number we just thought would be a fair way of saying we're almost at the finish line. You know,
Okay.
selling all these units. I want to mention, though, as Walter was talking about the rental piece of this, Arthur, you might weigh in too, but I want to say more than half of the discussion in the several hours of commentary about this was about the rentals. I think a lot of the unit owners came and they don't like the rentals. Some of them don't, because they came to the meeting for that purpose. They were much more focused, in my opinion, on the rentals than they were about any signage. It sort of became an angle for trying to, stop rentals. Now, the truth is the rentals are allowed, but as Walter's saying, they're becoming less and less, because now the inventory that's needed is going back into the sales, if you will. And, I mean, naturally, they want to sell. That's their business. And so when they get to the end, the rentals will be done as far as their inventory is concerned, which I think is a positive thing as it relates to the room full of people that were concerned about rentals.
Okay.
Rob, one of the things I noticed in the language, and I understand what you're saying, but we may just have to figure out exactly what you're referring to, is when you say owned or controlled by. the applicant? Like, once the number of units owned or controlled by?
We should just come to a number is what we should do, to
Yeah.
make that clear. I didn't mean to make that confusing.
Yeah, I didn't know what could, but it's all owned by the applicant, or do they have other entities that own some of these?
No,
units?
the entity that's the applicant in here,
Owns
which
the
is
95?
Daytona Grand LLC, owns the 95 left.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So the 3%, I was thinking whatever's left when you guys say yes to the extension, that's the threshold. We're hopeful that in 3 years it'll be 100% sold.
So,
but
so if we put a number and say when it gets down to 5, then the sign's gone.
then then you have nobody has to debate whether it was some percentage of something. It can
Right,
just be a
'cause,
number.
you know,
Yeah.
2.8 units could be.
Right. Let's just say you could say the last 5 units, if not the 95.
And I'll tell for the board, if you look in the original agreement, not the original, the sixth addendum for this, there was a lot of discussion, and we put in there a process whereby if there were complaints about the noise or the banners or anything like that.
The flapping, yeah, the
Flapping
flapping
or
was a
anything,
big
to
deal.
my knowledge, we've never had to take them to code enforcement for that, or any issue regarding that. So from a complaint standpoint, there have not been complaints the city received that, they weren't resolved before they got to us, so.
And we made it clear at that meeting that the opportunities were out there to have a process to deal with it if there was a problem, and there's been no process I'm aware of.
So, you're just, in essence, asking to continue doing what you've been.
More time to get these sold
For
out.
3 more years, right?
Or
Or
5
sold.
units, it sounds like.
Or 5 units, yeah.
Because you went from 137 to 95 in about a year.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I just got to ask, I
Any
know
more
it
questions for
complicates
Mr. Merrill?
things. Yes,
All right.
I just have to ask because but I know it complicates things. Let's say that the current holder of these bulk properties decides, I'm done with this, I'm going to sell them to somebody else. Does the agreement go with
Yeah, it goes
that?
with the limits.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm asking our guy.
Oh,
We're asking the other attorney.
PUD.
Yeah, but the way it's worded, I mean, the PUD goes with land, but it says that the applicant still
The applicant.
owns
Oh,
them.
so
He's saying if the applicant says, decides they're gonna sell to some other conglomerate or some other entity, we're selling 45 to you and 50 to you, we're done.
then
Again,
the
that's
applicants-
my bad, not making it clear. So in the case of a PUD zoning, the applicant, has successors and assigns that jump into his shoes by virtue of the original agreement. So you go back to not the Sixth Amendment, not the Fifth, not the Fourth, Third. Go back to the beginning. It says in the agreement, successors or assigns to the applicant. So it runs with the land, as Scott was saying about the
Yeah.
previous application. So, and I'll say that for the record now, we can make that clearer going forward to the
I
city
even know that
commission.
word, appertenant.
Say it again?
I said, I know that word, appertenant.
Yeah. So
Runs with the land.
there it is. Anything else from me?
You look befuddled there, Scott.
No.
What are you thinking? No? All right. More questions for Mr. Merrill? All right, thank you, Mr. Merrill.
Okay, thanks.
Who else would like to speak? All right, come on up. Tell us who you are and where you're from. Please speak into the microphone.
I will. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. My name is Don Durham. I live at 241 Riverside Drive, Suite 806. I am actually the condo president. I did want to say that Marina Grand, or Daytona Grand LLC has been a very good partner, okay? They've moved their sales office out front. We did have some complaints on the signage coming down. They did address that and got that. So I'm not really here to complain about that. We did take up this course of action at a board meeting in July, which I think you have documents on that. One of the questions I did ask at that board meeting and multiple times is, can anybody see the signage from their condominium? And at that time, nobody gave me that information, that in affirmative. But since then, I think as of last week, some people have come up to me and actually shown me pictures that from their condominium, they can actually look at this sign. And I have talked to Daytona Grand LLC about that, that I'm not really here to change our decision. They presented all the findings that they presented to you about the issues about sales going down and the problems that they had in drawing foot traffic. I would like to recommend is that if we could put some type of a signage really on the lip, on the top of that, and then that way you still have the signage up there. They can still get the foot traffic. People coming over the bridge that are heading towards the, I guess towards the west, when they're coming up over that Mason Bridge there, they can actually see that. Again, Daytona Grand LLC's been a good partner. We do want them to sell their condominiums, and get out. We understand that. I'm in business too. It's the velocity of money to be able to do that. They have done a lot of great things, got rid of the stay-and-plays that they would do, there, and the rentals have gone down. And obviously, we want the condominiums to be sold because then property values start to go up because there's a lot less available. And then those unit owners that are owners can actually sell those properties. I do have some pictures, but I think you can see that there. I can submit those to you. I do have pictures of what somebody can see, kind of outside their, sitting in their thing. And to me, for sitting there and looking at that for 2 or 3 years, I mean, again, I did communicate this with Daytona Grand LLC before I came here today, and I haven't got a response on at least that. They said they would take a look at that. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the board meeting that happened. I know someone suggested there were some questions there.
So, no, I have a question.
Surely.
So you are here representing yourself as a homeowner rather than the president of the board, because as I see this, it says that you voted for the reinstallation of the banner.
So the condominium board voted for that. I was the president of the condominium board, so that motion was carried. I'm still in agreement with having a banner up there because they say they presented that findings to the board. At that time, I did not have information where people could actually sit in their condominium and actually look at this for several, again, if I would have had that information, I would have asked for some additional requirements on that.
Okay. Thank you. Any more?
So I'm not here to change that at all. It's just, can we have looking at a qualifier? Right. And again, I've tried to communicate with Daytona Grand, and I just haven't received a response from them.
You used the term, our chairman has great grammar, but you used a term I don't understand, stay and play? What did?
Oh, yeah. So that was something to entice people to come to the condominium. So they would give them like an opportunity to stay here for like a week or two or something like that. And that's against our condominium association requirements. You have to be here for more than, I think it's 30 days. But a stay and play is something to get you to come in here for a week out of town, enjoy yourself during the races. And so there's a very transient type of, and they had kind of, and there was never any, stick-to-ness. It was just a way of getting in here for free for a week, and, and so you have these ins and outs. So we have lots of requirements. So when you come on property, you have to go through an onboarding process. These are rules, and so it's a very taxing portion to bring somebody here for a week for that. So that's a stay and play, and they got rid of those.
I didn't understand the term.
Well, I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, so the property is, you could have come in for a stay and play.
With a full refrigerator.
Wow.
Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Durham? No? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Anyone else like to speak? Yes, sir.
Robert Van Winkle, 1903, Building 1 in Marina Grande.
Okay.
I am indeed the recipient of the wonderful view of a huge banner in front of my balcony. I've had this to look at that literally for the past 5 years or since the banner is up there. And the city has, for good reason, implemented regulations for big signs and big banners. And I think the city of Holly Hill has done a great job doing that and enforcing that. All along the beaches, the tall buildings from Ormond Beach to Ponce Inlet, you will find 0 buildings with banners on it. All of those buildings have units for sale. Big buildings everywhere have people moving in, moving out, and there are units for sale. This building, if you come across the bridge, you can't miss it. It stands out. It's the building of Holly Hill. And for a little history, I bought this unit, bought 2 units back pre-construction in 2007. Used it for a couple of years as a vacation home. It's a beautiful property, great views, and I decided about 5 years ago to move in the place. And so I've enjoyed it all these years till they hung that banner. And I had to look at that banner for all these years. I think the bottom line is the applicants represent themselves as being the property owner. It's a bulk buyer that bought the empty units. At this point, they own about 100 units, which is roughly 20%, which means 80% of this building are individual owners, residents and investors. So we have a say also. I get it that these guys want to sell, bring their lawyer, have a nice petition to extend that, but when the city decided to give them that exception, an exception is usually for a limited period of time to help them. The economy was bad, the condo business, although we all know that by now the entire real estate business come back. Most homes the values are back where they were in 2007, pre-recession. Our building, I happen to have to pay $600,000 for this unit. It's down now. The values are still half. In fact, the new bulk buyer is selling below that price. That's why they're selling more units. Also, they have installed an office, a sales office, which was a very good move, right in the front rather than people having to come in. They have flags out on the front. They got some nice signage. And I think I've nothing against nice signage. They can have a sign in front, on the end, on every side of the building at eye level for people, and that is nice, and that's in keeping with the community. I think Holly Hill has a lot to offer. I believe it has the most beautiful river drive almost in the country, in the state. And so if you're going to have rules, you want to enforce those rules, and you want to work with people and give them a break where it's justified. And I think, but having this enormous banner, 150-foot banner there, is almost screaming, come and buy me. Are we still going to lower the prices? These days, real estate, everyone knows it. You own homes. You go to a broker or you look online. So many people buy. It's not like an impulse buying. I pass by, I see the McDonald's sign to buy a hamburger. Oh, there's a sign, I'm going to buy a condo. People see the building. If they are interested, they get up the bridge, they see the signs, the signs down below, which is done very well, and then they go into the sales office. And so to have that big sign there that I have to look at, and my print didn't come out very well.
If you give us something, you can't have it back. If you give us something, you cannot have it back.
Just show you. That's what I see from my window, from my balcony. And so from a picture from half a mile or quarter of a mile away, we will not show that, but that's what I'm seeing. And it flutters in the wind, doesn't make a lot of noise, but it does. And you just look at it. I don't think there should be no huge banner. There should be nice signage at ground level. But if they do want a sign, I discussed with the condo president, the COA president, let's have a sign where no one sees it. Have it in front of the building, between the windows. It will still be visible from the bridge and traffic or people even across the river, river boats coming by, etc. But no single resident. I'm happen to be in those 15 floors at that level. actually right there in the middle, that have to live with that. And I don't think it's right. And laws are on the books for a good reason. And so I hope you would consider if you give the exception, that the sign be moved to a more appropriate place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Winkle.
Thank you.
Very well spoken.
Did you? Oh, Lord have mercy.
I'm sorry, I'll let him go before you gave you a chance to ask a question. Too late.
No, but I do have a question of the applicant because of,
All right, Mr.
Statements.
Merrill, come up.
I'd rather have,
He's the sales guy, he's not exactly the applicant.
Well-
Okay.
I just have a question. The units that you have in your inventory, except for the ones that you're pulling back from rental, are these virgin units? Have they ever been lived in?
No, they're all, virgin units, vacant units that we're selling, with the exception of the ones that there's been a few that have been rented that we pulled back, but other
Yeah,
than
because you were
that.
talking about that before, and I didn't know if those other ones were just, because the man who was up here previously said there's other buildings that are selling units and stuff like that, and that happens all the time. These are still units that are trying to be sold from the original.
Yeah, from 2006 or 7 when the
2006.
building was. Yeah, and one of the things that I'd like to add to that, I think what Mr. Van Winkle said was great. But I'll tell you, when you drive down A1A, you probably don't know all the names of every one of those condos like we do as real estate agents, right?
Yeah.
So they're just buildings to you. So yes, the buildings are very prominent and very easy to see, but how do you identify when you're riding down A1A which one's for sale and which one to call in, and how to identify who might have somebody on site? If we take that off of the side or take the sign off of there, there's no real motivation for that person to make that corner and even find out that we have a sales office there, because there's none to indicate that this building is any different than the other, 75 buildings down A1A that you have no idea what the name is, what they sell for, how to find them.
Sure. I was just wanting to see if it was original inventory or you're just churning. If you're just churning through stuff, then I would have a different opinion of this sign. Thank you, Mr.
No,
Chairman.
yeah, it's original
And I have a
inventory.
question for you, too. Of those 95 units that have never, so you're not including the rental units that your client owns?
No, that was about 40, I don't remember the exact number, 44 of them, somewhere in there, are rental units of the 95 that are left. So we started out with this owner, we started out with about 150 of them, and in the first year, we sold about 50 of them. That left us with about 95. Of those, we still have 40. Because of the leases and everything on there, we couldn't start taking those rentals back until the leases expired and we did non-renewals.
Have you considered putting a banner around the top edge instead of it going up and down the side of the?
I don't think it's ever been brought up as something that's been brought up before. As Don said, he had mentioned it to Daytona Grand, but it hasn't. I don't think it's been something that's been like a major. We've had a lot of time to discuss or try to figure out exactly what to do there. I mean, there are about 10, 12, something like that, units there that I'm sure obviously can see it, and I don't know if it obstructs their view, but I'm sure that
Well, it
not
sounds
what he
like
wants to
Mr.
see.
Van Winkle's kind of tired of looking at it.
Right.
That'd be the impression I got.
But it has been there since when I started selling this project in 2014 when they first opened back up, and we had the banner then. And then after a couple of years, we decided to take a break from it, and some other companies that came in. That's when the banner went up and down, and when we came back, it was here. So for the majority of the time, since 2014, there has been a banner there, with the exception of some
Please,
taking it down.
Quesada.
What was the average price of a condo unit in 2014 when you started selling them?
They were in the twos. They were selling them really. So the prices have gone up of the units that we've sold. So what Mr. Van Winkle said in 2007, when he purchased, the penthouse ones were selling for $600,000 to $1 million, and they are about half of that. But they were even lower than that in 2014 when we first came on.
Is that condos in general?
No, that's
In
this
our
particular building.
In our community.
This particular
in Volusia County.
Yeah.
They've all taken that much of a.
Oh, no. There was only a few, and we were involved in a lot of these sales. There was only a few buildings that were up in 2006 and 7 when the market crashed. We helped close out 4 of those buildings on the beach side. That was the Bella Vista, the Palmavella, Marabella, and Portofino, which is in Port Orange. So we got all of those through the recession, and we were one of the only ones to keep those things selling during those times. And the signage on those greatly helped us out as well, because there again, like I said, when you're going down A1A, you wouldn't know where to go and which building to reach out to. Those buildings did take a hit very similar to this one, because the prices were so high in 2006 that when that recession came through, it flushed them down to about 50% as well.
Thank you.
More questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Are you going to come on forward, please?
Terry Wood, 231 Riverside Drive, just down the hallway from Robert there. The sign, I don't know if the sign is selling or not. I mean, anything can happen. But I took a ride in preparation of this meeting from Ormond through Daytona down to Daytona Beach Shore, and did not see one sign plastered on a building. Saw a couple billboards. I think Remax does a tremendous job in advertising in brochures, the selling brochures. They do a great job advertising in the News Journal. And I think the sign is now old. It's time for it to go and try a different approach to selling, because I just don't think it looks good anymore up there. That's my opinion.
Questions for him? Not for me. Thank you. Anyone else?
May I make a statement?
May you make a statement?
Just off of the none of the other condos having signs, I can explain why they don't. If it's not relevant, it doesn't matter.
All right, come forward so you can say it so everyone can hear what you have to say.
This is Walter Borgen with Remax again. I just wanted to explain that, yeah, that's very true. There's only 2 buildings all the way from Ormond by the Sea all the way down to Ponce Inlet that are new construction. Both of those are under construction with scaffolding all around them, so there's nowhere to put a sign. Every other building, there's not one other building that has new, never lived in, original developer inventory left in there. This is the only building in our area that does that.
And I think that's a pretty big issue, that it's new, never lived in unit.
And that's why I asked it, because it had me concerned. Does Rusty Wallace still own a condo? Never mind.
Yeah.
Does Rusty own a condo?
Rusty is under contract on a condo.
Thank you. For how many years?
No, it's, well, I don't want to give the exact date, but it should be closing this year.
Thank you.
No one else to speak? All right. Any more questions from the board?
I don't have any.
The number,
The number?
we talked about 5. Mr. Simpson, have you made note of that?
Whatever
Whatever the motion is?
Yeah, well, you got to make the motion whatever you want.
It's included in your.
2.85, heck.
Yeah. So 8/10 of a condo.
Yeah. Well, maybe you got 10 good friends. All right. Well, I will entertain a motion.
Commissioner,
It's,
can I make a clarification?
Yes, you may make it hold your motion
I'm
for a
holding.
moment.
I had stated that the only issue before us was the banner, and the applicant did correct me. There is some temporary signage out front that they are.
This is all the signage.
That
That's
they'd
the
also
way
like.
that I read it. It was everything that we approved before is the way I read what we were doing, yeah.
and no one's complained about the other signage in any of the, no one here spoke up, nothing.
Right.
So my motion is just because we were talking about this banner.
Your motion is to, I don't think Liz got that because I didn't.
I know, I haven't got there yet. I
Oh, I'm
wanted to make
sorry.
sure there wasn't some other information I needed to make the proper motion, and I think that we should, is there a time limit on this one, Mr. Walker?
The request is for an additional 3 years or until such time that the owners no longer own or control greater than 3%, whichever occurs sooner.
That's
So if we approve it tonight and he's still got 20 unsold units, it continues without a change.
Whichever occurs first.
Yeah, that's the part I don't like. So can we change that to 3 years or the 5?
It would be what the applicant is,
Whatever happens first, if we get down to 5 units and it's a year and a half from now, that's the end. Or if we get to 3 years and there's 25 units, it's still 3 years. So it's one of the two. It's the sooner of the two, Arthur.
Okay.
The sooner of the two.
Whichever occurs first.
Whichever occurs first. I wanted to clarify that.
Mr. Van Winkle, I'm sorry, we're done with that part.
So I would make a motion that we approve this with the number being down to 5 units sold.
And this is a recommendation to the
Correct.
commission.
Because everybody that, if you don't like this, you can come
Yeah,
to the city commission meeting, and they're going to make the final decision. This is just a recommendation to them.
So you have made your
So
motion.
I have made my motion.
Did you get it, Ms. Liz?
I think it's for approval with 3 years or down to 5 units, whichever occurs first.
Correct.
Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Do I have any more discussion? Call the question, please.
Arthur Burns,
Yes.
Tony Casada.
Yes.
Michael Meyer.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you very much. I've lost my agenda in this.
Like to the first group of people that were here for the retention pond and the fence, we never did mention to them that this was just our opinion. It has to go in front of the commission.
No, because it wasn't.
That was it.
That was a final decision.
That was a final decision.
Right.
That's why I asked about the appeal from the citizens' point of view. Because no matter what we did, we wouldn't have been able to make them put a fence around that retention pond, which is what I would have liked to have done.
But there's retention
And
ponds all over
so
the city.
All over the city.
All over
You're
the city.
absolutely right.
Fourth
Well,
Street,
Big John fought the fight about the pond prisons.
if he was on one side, I was on the other.
And
whatever
so-
it was. All
I
right.
have a different opinion of the ones along Nova Road, but this has got right in the middle of a neighborhood.
But it's not gonna hold water, Arthur. It is not made to hold water. It is, right? That's the whole deal.
So that means when it's dry, the neighbors are gonna be parking their extra cars in there, and,
Yeah.
a fence does more than keep kids out.
Everything, all of those, every bad thing that you can think of is gonna happen there. There'll be homeless people walking through, there'll be neighbors parking their cars in the retention pond. There'll be gymnastics girls going out
girls going out there and
behind and skinny dipping in the dry retention pond. I can see it all now. I don't think there's any
And
old board
there's nothing that
business.
prevents the owner, as long as he complies with our regulations, if his liability insurance says we would like a fence around that, his liability insurance may want him to have a fence.
That's true.
As long as he complies with our requirements for a fence, nothing prevents him from installing it himself.
Right.
The only question is, do we have the ability to require a fence? And given the slope, the depth, those type of parameters, it doesn't meet our requirements for a fence, as I understand.
Right. And that's the way I understood it too, that it wasn't a wet pond. That was never meant to be a wet pond.
And I apologize for being late, just,
You ran into a protest somewhere.
no, for some reason, I just thought the meeting started at 6:30. I don't,
Well, just because it started at 6:30, for a few years, I can,
didn't it start at 6:30 one
yeah,
time?
we did
Okay.
start it for 6:30 for
I think-
a while. And then we moved
Yeah.
it
We used to what?
yeah.
It's
Then
gotten
then
shorter
kept-
and shorter.
Ever since Brian came, we've been moving it back. The next month, I heard we're gonna meet at 5.
Are we? Just give me an update.
if you're open to 5:30,
Scott, where are they putting that bowling alley at?
can we adjourn, because I really need to go pee.
You say it.
Are they gonna put that at the Sunshine Mall?
Honestly, to be perfectly honest with you, I have not seen
We got old
anything.
business, excuse me, come to order. Old business? In communications? All in favor of adjourning?
Adjourned.
Say aye.
Say aye.
Aye. Let's go. 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 Let's go.